Welcome, everybody, to the Keto Edge Summit, where we are dispelling the myths, helping you overcome the hurdles, and empowering you to improve your brain and your body through the ketogenic lifestyle. I'm your host, Dr. David Jockers. I'm really excited about today's interview because I've got Dr. Will Cole here. And Dr. Will is literally, one of the top functional medicine doctors really in the whole world, and really has a specialty in helping people overcome autoimmune disease and getting to the root cause of chronic disease and helping people start to change and adapt their physiology and get well. He actually has one of the best summits out there with Jimmy Moore, another guest on this, and it's called Keto Talks. And he really provides the functional medicine component to that, really talking about topics kind of like what we're talking about today, which is a really exciting topic. It's keto and adrenal fatigue, real popular topic out there in the blogosphere and online. And we're going to dive into that in detail. Dr. Will is located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He works with people all over the world. Obviously, today's day and age with the internet makes it so much easier to do that. You're able to really connect with people all over the world, run labs, and provide the health coaching that they need to get well. And so, Dr. Will, welcome to the Keto Edge Summit. Excited to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And so tell us your story, how you really got involved in functional medicine to begin with, and really just your journey.
Sure. Well, it all started when I was growing up. I lived in a home where my parents were interested into natural health, and it was sort of ingrained in our lifestyle and how we saw the body and how we treat our body. So that's sort of my perspective growing up, but it didn't evolve into functional medicine until I was at sort of an integrative school. There were DCs and MDs and DOs and LACs, all these sort of different modalities in healthcare at Southern California University of Health Sciences in Los Angeles. And I heard of a guy called Datis Karazian who was doing this thing called functional medicine. And he was years older than I was, and he'd gone to my school, and I looked into it and I thought, wow, like this is everything that I really wanted to do. I didn't have a name for it, but it was functional medicine, and it's really been this organic process ever since then. I've immersed myself in this, and now somehow I'm talking to people all around the world. I'm humbled and thankful for the opportunity to really started with myself, but really impact people around the world's life through evidence-based alternative medicine, or functional medicine is what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you're a great writer too. I've read a lot of your articles. You write for Mind Body Green, which is one of the top health websites. Yeah. And you sit on their board as well. Is that correct?
I'm one of their course instructors, and I do a lot of things with them. They're great people. I've been with them for years, but I love writing. I've always been interested in writing, and I love it. I love being able to put that in words in ways that, it's in my head, kind of putting it so people can read it all around. It's so cool. It's such an awesome time to live in, and I love it.
I can totally relate with that because I'm a writer as well. So I love writing. And so as a writer, I really admire the work of another writer, especially in my field. So really great to just be able to connect with you here too. This is really our first time connecting, even though I've been a fan of yours for a while. So
likewise, I'm excited to talk.
Yep. And so our topic today is how keto and ketogenic lifestyle impacts adrenal fatigue. And so can you define what adrenal fatigue is and really what the proper terminology is for this condition? Because it's real popular. A lot of people are talking about adrenal fatigue, but you and I know that science is evolving literally every day. We're realizing that this may not be the right term for this condition, but there is obviously an adrenal component and a fatigue component to it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, yes, it does involve the adrenals, and people do typically feel fatigued. So it's a layman term for it. There's nothing inherently wrong with calling it that, but at the same time, it's not descriptive. It's not really helping the patient or helping the person understand what's going on in their body. So I'm said with well intentions online, I'm sure, and people, it's something easy that people can kind of think of, oh, I feel this way and this is what's going on in my body. Well, that may or may not be true, but also, like, what is it? What's going on? When we talk about adrenal fatigue, what is going on here? It's really nothing inherently wrong with the adrenal glands. This is not Addison's disease, like an autoimmune adrenal disease. This is something that is really a brain-based issue, something called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis. It's like, what is my brain saying to my adrenal glands? And this communication line, this sort of CEO, your brain, is supposed to speak to the employee, the adrenal glands, and tell it what to do. So the adrenal glands and adrenal fatigue, what we call, is really an HPA axis dysfunction. It's an imbalance of the communication line between the brain and the adrenal glands. So that's really, when you talk about the core dysfunction that's going on there, it's really this HPA axis dysfunction that's at play.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you and I have some training in chiropractic. We both have chiropractic degrees, and that's, chiropractic really taught me that the brain and nervous system control the whole body. And so in typical conventional medicine, it's very reductionistic, where they break it down into an individual part. So they're just looking at the adrenals and they're saying, okay, how are the adrenals working? If the adrenals aren't working, then you have Addison's disease, and they diagnose it with that. Whereas, we're looking at the whole body and how it's working together. And so what you're saying is, hey, it's how the brain is communicating with the adrenal glands to tell them to secrete the right stress hormones to give us energy, to allow us to perform well. And when there's some sort of dysfunction there, that we're going to have a number of symptoms. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more and go into some symptoms that people will experience often? That's when they have adrenal fatigue or HPA axis dysfunction.
Sure. So first of all, I think it's important to frame this in the sense of cortisol. Again, it's with this blogosphere, I think, a lot, and on the TV ads. Cortisol is kind of demonized in a way that it's bad. It's a stress hormone, therefore it's bad. It's going to make me hold on to weight. It's a problem. Well, it's really just like almost anything in the body. It's not inherently good or bad. It's actually a really good thing in balance. And I think the imbalance is the issue, not inherently cortisol being this bad guy. And it's subject to the Goldilocks principle, not too high, not too low, but just right. And for cortisol, just right at the right time. So with cortisol, you want it higher in the morning to wake you up in the morning, and then this nice S-shaped circadian rhythm throughout the day to then allow you to sleep well at night, for serotonin to be converted to melatonin, and for this sort of symbiotic, nice hormonal balance for you to feel great and to sleep well and to be just your thriving self. So adrenal fatigue, or this HPA axis dysfunction, this brain-based issue, is cortisol imbalance. It's high when it should be low, or low when it should be high, or always low. It's just a lack of that balance from the brain adrenal axis. So what does this make someone feel like? What are some of the symptoms that I see clinically? It's someone feeling exhausted despite, trying to sleep throughout the whole night. They're like going to bed at the right time, but they wake up feeling like a truck hit them. That's how people describe it. And they're hangry a lot. So this like hungry and angry is evil spawn. They're craving salty foods, and they are irritable. They get this PM slump of energy. They just like need to nap, and sometimes they can't nap. So they're like downing coffee and caffeinated beverages to stay awake throughout the day. And then invariably they get this surge, the second wind of energy at nighttime, and they're like, what the heck? I've been tired the whole day and now I can't fall asleep. So this is a very common way of describing adrenal fatigue or HPA axis dysfunction.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can relate. I think most people have experienced that wired and tired kind of feeling. You're exhausted, you can't wait to go to bed, you need rest, but then you lay down and your mind just won't turn off. Yeah. And that's really what Dr. Will's here talking about. And so what role does the HPA axis and just stress hormones in general play in blood sugar regulation and the development of ketones?
Yeah. So again, this cortisol balance, the circadian rhythm is very important for your homeostasis, for you to feel well, because cortisol, as with other hormones, they all communicate with each other. So if one hormone's off, that can lead to sort of downstream other hormonal imbalances. So cortisol regulates your blood sugar. You want this nice circadian rhythm. But actually, when you talk about ketogenesis and ketones, some people, and I've read this online, I've heard people sort of poo-poo the ketogenic diet and say it's going to mess up adrenal fatigue. You're not getting healthy carbs. You're doing the body damage by doing this. But the evidence that is out there today, and obviously more research needs to be done, but there's evidence to show that ketones, obviously we know they pass through the blood-brain barrier, but they actually help with hypothalamic function. They actually help with HPA stimulation. So this discommunication, this dysfunctional relationship between the brain and the adrenal glands, I find clinically, and there's evidence to show this, that as you decrease inflammation, which is one hallmark of this HPA axis dysfunction, you're getting blood sugar balance, which is a benefit of ketogenesis as well. There's so many good benefits of this, because cortisol imbalance will cause blood sugar imbalance, will cause inflammation. Well, what is cortisol? It's a very potent anti-inflammatory. So if cortisol is spiking and dipping, that can impact inflammation levels. These things are not good for ketosis. So the more you can get blood sugar balance, the more you can get insulin down, the more you can get inflammation levels down. This is good for your blood sugar, and it's good for ketosis.
Yeah, I know. And when you and I are really helping people, obviously one of the first steps we got to do is address that blood sugar. Because if blood sugar is out, they're just going to constantly have inflammation. You're never really going to get over adrenal fatigue or whatever symptoms you're experiencing. So really, really important topic here. And what labs are available? How do you test for this HPA axis dysfunction?
So there's good studies out there to kind of show what labs are the best. I've been gravitating toward, and again, we're always developing. We're really at the forefront.
Yeah. It's always changing. You may have had a lab test that you ran, got great results on somebody a year ago, and now you're running a different lab test. Yep. So
exactly. So it's an evolving industry. It's an evolving awareness of how we can get the best data for our patients. And at this point, the best data for the patients is looking at cortisol awakening response. And it's basically getting saliva test up 30 minutes after you wake, and then about 60 minutes after you wake, because what researchers are finding is that when we wake up, when we open our eyes, cortisol raises about 50% on average. And then about 30 minutes after you wake up, it's still raising. But then about an hour after you wake up, it's already peaked and it's kind of dipping. So what researchers are correlating is this cortisol awakening response is associated with these HPA axis dysfunctions, or associated with depressive disorders. So by measuring that cortisol awakening response, we can pinpoint and really customize healthcare based on the individual, instead of just throwing out flippantly, you have adrenal fatigue. Let's actually use the best evidence that we have today. And there's no perfect lab, but let's use the best evidence that we have today to get insight in context with the health history and in context with other data, and not just hang your hat on one lab, but really get an integrative, comprehensive view of what's going on here. But yeah, I mean, elevated cortisol awakening response is associated with different depression issues, person's stressed out. They're just like, they have psychological stress. They're not handling their stress well. And this depressed slump cortisol awakening response is associated with inflammatory issues, because their cortisol is not balancing the inflammation. So autoimmune disease, just inflammatory problems at large. So this is one tool that I look at in context with everything else to kind of see how their HPA axis is functioning.
Yeah, because like you talked about before, cortisol is so important for reducing inflammation. It's an anti-inflammatory molecule. Most people don't realize that. They just think cortisol is bad. And what you're saying is, hey, we got to have the right amount of cortisol. It should give you that energy in the morning. Like I ask my patients, hey, I think for most of us, getting out of bed in the morning, it's going to be, even for a healthy person, there's going to be times where you want to rest. You're not excited about getting out of bed, but about 5 minutes after you wake up and you drink some water, go to the bathroom, you should notice that you have good energy. You're ready to get going with your day. And that's a good gauge, right? It's like you should be able to have good energy. If you feel over anxious, if you feel just absolutely fatigued, like you can just go right back to bed and fall asleep, it's a sign you probably don't have a good cortisol awakening response. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. So these are signs that people can start really becoming conscious of it. So I think so many people they're on this sort of like unconscious, they're not kind of tapped into what their body's telling them. And I hope summits like this can really make people more mindful of, wait, this is not normal, and this actually is me, and start questioning how they can optimize their health. And some of these issues can get really bad for some people, and they're on autopilot, all that, and their life passes before them, and they just are the way that I hear most people with HPA axis describe it is, I'm pushing through to get through the day.
Right.
I can push through just sheer willpower, but it's not a good quality day. I'm like snippy with everybody. I'm irritable, but I get through the day. I go to work. I'm with my kids, but it's not a good quality life. So this is what we need to restore in people, and when we can restore with people when we start dealing with these hormonal imbalances.
I mean, it's so true. We live in a rocky culture. It's like rocky is kind of symbolizes the American culture where we just work hard, blue collar, just keep pushing through. The reality is, especially today's day and age, we have so many stressors that people can only do that for so long. Yeah. And then you just get drained, and it takes all the joy out of your life. And that's another thing I hear is basically it's what you just said, is that people are just getting through their day. They're not thriving. They don't have joy. And in fact, they're oftentimes binging on sugar and carbs to provide some level of emotional lift at the end of the day, because they're not really, they don't have normal joy because they're dealing with this sort of a adrenal rhythm disorder, this HPA axis dysfunction. And, and their health is really suffering because of it. Mm-hmm. So really good points. And so, as we're talking about the ketogenic diet, and there's so many benefits to ketosis, we know it's extremely anti-inflammatory, improves mitochondrial just biogenesis, so more mitochondria, we produce more cellular energy, great for the brain, emotional balance, really good for the immune system. However, there's a lot of people that are talking about, hey, if you have HPA axis dysfunction, don't start going on a ketogenic diet. And I think you and I are like, hey, you know what? Ketosis could actually be a great strategy for somebody that's dealing with this, but there are precautions that clinicians like you and I would definitely guide people with when it comes to this. And don't just go out and necessarily just find a ketogenic recipe guide and just get started. There's some precautions that you should take. And so can you break that down? Like what kind of precautions you teach people as they're approaching this, especially if they're suffering with HPA axis dysfunction?
Yeah. So this is a good point. Even with good, healthy, natural things that we know work in people's lives, one of the hallmarks of functional medicine is finding out what works for the individual. Yeah. And then within the confines of that, maybe personalize this thing called ketogenic lifestyle. Mm-hmm. There's not one way to do it. And sometimes you do have to lean somebody in, and sometimes it's not needed, and you just need to just jump in and quit being a baby about it. You know what I mean? So it's about what's right for the individual. And a lot of people can do this on their own. But there are some people with these HPA, like the people with HPA axis issues or these inflammatory issues and autoimmune issues. It's like, well, what's the best steps for the individual? Now, and this is not relevant for everybody, but a lot of people with these HPA axis dysfunctions have aldosterone, like a decrease of aldosterone, which is a hormone that your adrenal glands secrete. And aldosterone's job, amongst other things, is sort of balance these electrolytes, which are these nutrients in your body that help with fluid retention, like sodium and potassium, and this balance that's there. Well, people with HPA axis dysfunctions tend to have lower aldosterone levels. Again, why? Because the brain's not speaking to the adrenal glands. So the adrenal glands are like, what the heck should I do? So it's not producing aldosterone. So there's a decrease of sodium. The body's sort of getting rid of sodium. You're excreting it through your urine. And then on top of this, then someone says, I want to do the ketogenic thing. And they go in and do the ketogenic diet. And then what does that do? That increases the body to get rid of more electrolytes, because you're losing a lot of that fluid retention, that interstitial fluid. And that could make even more sodium loss. So it's compounding the already lower sodium levels. So one thing I find with someone with HPA axis dysfunction, and then we bring in a ketogenic approach, is that we need to supplement with sodium levels. This is counterintuitive to a lot of people. Like, sodium's bad, right? And they avoid all of this added salt. We're talking about quality salt like Himalayan sea salt, like a whole food form. And we have to bring not a lot, but a couple teaspoons a day to really mitigate that lower sodium excretion, the lower sodium levels because of the higher excretion, because of the HPA axis function, and then the ketogenic response that it has there.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I mean, just in general on the ketogenic diet, we're going to have lower insulin levels, and insulin plays a role with retaining sodium, and so does aldosterone. So we've got both of those things going on. We really need to make sure we're supporting those electrolytes. So absolutely, it's just so important. So we're getting obviously the sodium in there. How about meal frequency? Because I know a lot of people when they have adrenal fatigue or HPA axis dysfunction, they're told, hey, eat, 5 meals a day, 6 meals a day. So if somebody's dealing with that, you want to kind of transition them to a lower carb diet. How do you deal with the meal frequency component?
I typically find, and again, everybody's different, but I typically find that at the beginning, as they're getting fat adapted, meal frequency does behoove them because they're kind of navigating this new way of eating, and they're not completely fat adapted. And part of it may be an emotional aspect of it too, because they know if I don't eat, I don't feel this way. So there's this inner anxiety towards not eating. So it sort of is a nice buffer of them not having the bad snacks or the unhealthy carby snacks, but they're going to a healthy keto snack that we know, once you're fully fat adapted, your body's stable, you don't need all that stuff. But in this transition time of healing their body, which takes time, it's not a quick fix, then a healthy keto snack is probably your best option, because you don't want that person, whether it's because of a true physiological need or a mental emotional craving, they're just a habit maybe, you don't want them to go for the bad snack. So give them tools so they can really make this sustainable for them, both physically and emotionally.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm a huge fan of intermittent fasting, but fasting is a stressor on the body. It's a mild stressor, hormetic stressor. Somebody that's already struggling to deal with any sort of stress, it could overwhelm their system. So I like your philosophy there. That's really what I teach is, hey, let's start by consuming a lower carb ketogenic style meal every 3 to 4 hours. Get that blood sugar stable. So you're feeling better, you're sleeping better. We start addressing all the other stressors and reducing those. Then we start to push back, the meal timing and extending our time between meals, or really just restricting our overall feeding window to 8 hours or so, or 6 hours, whatever it is that your body responds best to. So really good point. And so what are 5 great foods? And we talked about salt, right? And just the importance of getting more sodium in there. And so what are 5 great foods? And you could throw in just, some condiments as well that somebody with HPA axis dysfunction should be doing as they really, if they're pursuing a ketogenic lifestyle, or if they just want to get well, what should they be focusing on as far as foods?
Yeah, so you mentioned the salt. So I think if you want to use a food for that, bone broth is one option there. So you're going to have some natural occurring salts. You can obviously add some Himalayan sea salt. So if you don't want to just have salt water, if that's not your thing, you could go for bone broth, which we know obviously is not just a vehicle for salt, but it has a lot of benefits for your body. Collagen content's really good. So you get other added benefits for the gut, which we know is your second brain. And I find a lot of people with HPA axis dysfunctions, a part of their upstream sort of core dysfunction actually begins in the gut and the communication between the gut-brain axis. So that's something to consider. And obviously bone broth's not going to cure all your gut problems alone, but it's a tool. It's a food medicine tool to really aid your body in healing from a gut standpoint. And it helps with salt intake too, if that's a problem for you. 5 foods. So another one that I love is oysters, of all things. So I like the zinc content. I like lithium in these mollusks that help with neurotransmitter health, and these sort of trace minerals that are depleted in a lot of people's diet. If you don't eat shellfish, some people don't, then maybe organ meat would be appropriate. Like grass-fed liver is another great source of trace minerals. good with B vitamins and choline, which is needed for neurotransmitters, and methylation, which is one problem that I find with a lot of people with these HPA axis issues. They tend to have more of these methylation polymorphisms like MTHFR and COMT gene and VDR gene, these genes that make basically it just means your body's not that good at making things and detoxing and balancing itself. So supporting those genetic weaknesses with these nutrient-dense foods. You can't talk about ketosis without talking about healthy fat. So sardines is like probably my go-to thing. Healthy omega fats, it's good for inflammation, it's good for your brain, it's good for your hormones. I like ghee too, like clarified grass-fed butter. You get your fat-soluble vitamins in there, like A and D and K2. So I don't know if that was 5 or not, but close to 5.
Oh, that's great, man. You're giving just so many great strategies here. So yeah, adding in those healthy fats. He's talking about wild-caught fish, grass-fed butter or ghee like you were talking about. And ghee is usually well tolerated. We know that when people have a dairy sensitivity, it's typically to the protein component, sometimes to the lactose. They're not producing enough lactase enzyme. But ghee is basically completely free of the casein, the whey, the lactose that's in dairy products. So most people do very, very well with ghee, even if they have an autoimmune issue or a food sensitivity to dairy. Typically, the only time that I'll almost say, stay away from ghee is if we know that they have a significant food allergy, right? Like a IgE, which is a different antibody reaction, which can cause more dangerous and immediate reaction in their body. Other than that, I find that they typically do very well with ghee. Do you find that as well?
Yeah, I do. And there are brands that are batch test to make sure it's casein free. There are cultured ghee that kind of gets you some probiotics there and further helps with the non-immunoreactivity, the fact that you're going to tolerate it better, basically. And I mean, that's a whole probably other conversation, but then the beta A1, beta A2 casein, you're getting quality dairy, even if there are trace amounts of casein in it. It's this, ancient OG casein that tends to be better tolerated than A2 casein.
Yeah, and making sure it's grass-fed, right? So making sure it's from grass-fed cows, you get so much more nutrient density from that. And, you throw that, you melt it on some cruciferous veggies like some steamed broccoli or cauliflower. You can add some herbs, basil, oregano, different things like that. Turmeric. I know you're a big fan of turmeric. You can make some mashed potatoes alternative with the cauliflower, throw the ghee in there. Turmeric, great carrier for turmeric. Ghee is, as well as cruciferous veggies. And you've got just an awesome meal. And then you can add the salt to it. And you don't have to be fearful of the salt like you were talking about. Okay, in fact, we need that, right? We need it. And when you go low carb, you should naturally crave more salt, more sodium. I know for myself, on this ketogenic lifestyle, I'll crave pickle brine. Like, I just want to drink pickle brine. I want to drink kimchi, the kimchi juice. Yeah. And so back when I was addicted to sugar, I never craved things like that. But now it's like, there are days where I'm like, you know what? The only thing I really want right now is pickle brine or bone broth or something like that.
Living on the wild side.
Exactly. Absolutely. So let's talk about some supplements. What are some of your favorite supplements, go-to supplements for helping balance blood sugar, supporting the HPA axis dysfunction, and the development of ketones in the body?
Good question. So first of all, and I know we're on the same page, just so people know this, is that you can't supplement your way out of a poor diet. So a lot of people want the easy things. They want the pill. Even if it's a natural pill, they want that over their food. You have to get your food right first. And then these things are like next level stuff to really hone in and target and take it to the next level, because they're, of course, very therapeutic. And I do have patients that are on the non-compliant side and still see great results of taking these natural medicines. But imagine if they married both of the benefits of food and natural medicines. Wow, that's how it should be, right? Adaptogens, you can't talk about HPA axis dysfunction without talking about adaptogens. So I've written a lot about it. Again, going back to the writing thing, it's like this, I see this as like this kingdom, this adaptogenic kingdom with all these cool different players or characters in this kingdom that really do a lot of cool things. But they all have their own strengths, but they all have this commonality of balancing inflammation levels and balancing cortisol levels. So whether your cortisol is high or low or like a roller coaster, it tends to have this sort of dampening, balancing effect of cortisol throughout the day. So it's good no matter what this HPA axis dysfunction looks like on labs. Adaptogens tend to be a good one size fits all in many ways to help with people with different types of HPA axis dysfunction. So what the heck are adaptogens? They are things like ashwagandha, holy basil, or tulsi, rhodiola. There's a lot of maca, and then adaptogenic mushrooms. I know I'm throwing weird names out here, but things like chaga, things like lion's mane have really neuroprotective benefits too. So I'm a fan of finding what adaptogens work for the person and then using blends of them, because they all have this sort of synergistic effect where they complement one another. And then using them in your life. You can put them in smoothies. You can just make like sort of an elixir and sort of have it with your tea. You can cook with them. You mentioned using the ghee and maybe the bone broth. You could mix some powdered adaptogens in your bone broth or with your ghee. You can, like the adaptogenic mushrooms like lion's mane, you can actually bake it in the oven and eat it whole. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with adaptogens. And going back to the salt water, that's another one to consider. That's a supplement in a way. So just having like a
it kind of is. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's something super simple you can do.
Right.
And then I would say, depending on your labs, depending on the electrolyte lab array and the biomarkers there, looking at calcium, looking at magnesium, looking at potassium, and supplementing according to that too. Because a lot of people with HPA axis dysfunction tend to be lower in magnesium too. So maybe getting a quality magnesium or a CalMag powder, that's something to consider too.
Yeah, I found magnesium almost has adaptogenic qualities to it.
Yeah,
It really helps balance out that HPA axis. So, and if you take in too much magnesium, you have diarrhea. That's basically the number one sign. So, which most people really need anyways, because most people's bowel motility is sluggish. So just a little, giving yourself a little, go to bowel tolerance with the magnesium, give yourself a little cleanse, and then kind of back down, right? I find to be real helpful for people. And I love how you talked about just those adaptogenic herbs. I mean, these are herbs that, they've survived extreme geographical stresses. And so they've adapted to that stress, and they develop compounds within them that help them adapt and go back to homeostasis and deal with extreme heat, extreme cold, and predators. And putting that in our body gives us, just a higher level of, in a sense, adaptogenic qualities, so we can adapt to the stress in our life.
Yeah.
So, yeah, love it. This has been a fantastic interview. Really brought a great component to just the overall Keto Edge Summit, talking about this idea. Now, we don't have to be fearful, if we're dealing with HPA axis dysfunction, of a ketogenic journey, a ketogenic lifestyle. We may not jump in, just jump in the deep water with doing long fasts and, just extreme low carb, but we can start to gradually shift and move our body in that direction while we deal with the underlying root issues and start to take in, more minerals, like you were talking about, the right type of mineral-rich foods. And, we didn't even talk about like sea vegetable, right? How key sea, I mean, there's so many things that we could talk about, but you did mention good seafood like oysters and fish, which are actually very good sources of sodium, natural salts, anything from the ocean really is to help support electrolyte balance. So it's just been an awesome interview, Dr. Well. I really want to thank you for coming on. It's really an honor and privilege to have you on here. Is there anything that you want to add for the listener? Anything that you feel like, any parting words or parting message you want to give?
Yeah, I would say what comes to mind is a lot of these problems that we're talking about and how someone feels with HPA axis dysfunction, it's so, just here in general, just because something's common doesn't make it normal. Yeah. And people look around and they look at everybody and they're like, wow, and they're comparing themselves to everybody around them who's feeling just as miserable as they are. And they call that normal. Just because something's common doesn't make it normal. HPA axis dysfunction is certainly ubiquitous, but it is not normal. You can, in most cases, reverse it, heal it, improve it, manage it. So if you can do that, why would you settle for anything less? And a lot of people think, I'm just getting older, I'm just stressed, I'm just this, I'm just that, I just have my family stuff going on. This is stuff that people shouldn't settle for just getting through the day. People shouldn't just settle for just can't wait till they lay their head in the pillow or get on their DVR and watch their favorite shows just to veg out. What is the quality of your day? Are you living the quality of the day that you want to live? If you are, then fantastic. I'm not talking to you. But there's so many people that aren't living the quality of day that they want to. That's who we're talking about throughout this conversation.
Yeah, so true. Well, Dr. Will, I want to really acknowledge you just for being an outstanding writer and pushing the healthcare conversation forward. You're out there putting out great content, really helping to empower people, putting the power back into people's hands. And just like what you just said, just helping people understand they don't have to settle for less than their best, and being a voice of truth and a voice of just the passion that you bring to that, and just the hope that you provide people. And I know you're working with people all around the world on a regular basis. And can you share with our audience just how they can connect with you and start really grabbing the content that you're providing and even work with you, hire you as a health coach?
Yeah, so we see patients around the world via FaceTime or Skype or Google Hangout consultations. About 80% of our patients are in other states and countries, and 20% are in Pittsburgh. But it's at alldrwillcole.com. So it's just my name, drwillcole.com. And we offer a free health evaluation if you want to get a functional medicine perspective on what you're going through, or there's like video classes and articles, all that good stuff on there too. So that's how people can learn more.
Absolutely. And I know you've got a great podcast as well. Can you plug that as well?
Yeah, so a podcast is with Jimmy Moore, Keto Talk. It's amazing. It's a lot of fun. We answer everybody's ketogenic questions for the week, and we also cover the headlines, all like the latest news and research in the ketogenic world. So it's a lot of fun. And I bring my functional medicine perspective. Jimmy brings his lifelong experience in podcasting, his humor, and ketogenic lifestyle too.
Yeah, really great podcast. I'm subscribed to it. I listen to it every week when it comes out. So I appreciate you guys doing that. And so if you, the listener, are out there and you have enjoyed this interview and you want to get more, you want to go in more depth with this and start on your ketogenic journey, then I want to just I just want to encourage you to take a look at owning the Keto Edge Summit for yourself. By owning it, you're going to own the transcripts, all the recordings, be able to listen to people like Dr. Will. And so if you would check that out, we would be so honored. And we'll see you on a future interview. God bless everyone.